Hi, I'm James Hamilton from Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, and today I'm going to show you how easy it can be to carve something from wood. Many people look at wood carving and they just assume it's beyond their abilities. But while it is true that different levels of carving require different amounts of natural talent, that doesn't mean an amateur can't carve something really cool with very little practice. Today I'm going to show you how you can do more than you think if you just give it a try. What I set out to do was reproduce an old wooden wall hanging that I saw at an antique sale. I don't know who made the original, but it looks a lot like some of the early colonial folk art I've seen over the years. It's pretty large, so I glued up some pine construction lumber to make a slab that was about 42 inches long, 17 inches wide, and 3 inches thick. I didn't worry about grain orientation or the particular carving characteristics of this material because the tool I was going to use works pretty much the same no matter what I'm carving. To sketch out the shape of the eagle, I used an old artist's trick. I drew a ½ inch grid over the picture. You can't see it that well here, but the grid actually does go over the bird. Then I drew a 1-inch grid on my workpiece. The grid makes it a lot easier to keep everything in proportion while also doubling the eagle's size as I sketch it. I've seen people who can't sketch anything freehand to save their lives make some really nice drawings using this grid method. Another option would have been to print out my pattern at full size and then use carbon paper to trace it on the workpiece. Here's the tool I used for almost all of this carving. It's called the Arbortech mini grinder, and it's really just a metal blade with chainsaw-like teeth attached to an angle grinder. It's a deceptively simple tool that can do a lot of cool things, as you'll see. The mini grinder can remove wood very quickly. You can make rough cuts using the edge of the cutter or smoother cuts using the surface. This was my very first time using this tool, but it didn't take me long to get the hang of it, and I was making chips fly in no time. As I mentioned, you don't have to pay attention to grain direction with this type of power carver as much as you would with traditional carving gouges. That doesn't mean that the cut isn't affected by the grain direction at all. In fact, you will quickly see that cuts against the grain are rougher than those with the grain. But since we're just trying to hog the material away at this point, it doesn't make much of a difference. We'll smooth things out later. As I worked, I had to keep the shape of the eagle in mind. Certain areas had to be lowered more than others to give it a three-dimensional appearance. I found it was easier to color those areas in with a pencil that needed to be lowered, so I knew where the bulk of the material had to be removed. Power carving is a messy process. If you can do it outdoors, that's always a good idea. I had a ton of cleanup to do in the shop after this project. Because the mini grinder removes wood fast, I found that it was much easier to maintain full control if I held it tightly against my body as I worked. I also changed the orientation of the cutter itself to the wood to control how aggressive the cuts were. Like I said, it didn't take me long to do a little experimentation and really get the hang of it. The highest point of the carving was the eagle's shoulder. The body is really just a cone laying on its side and sloping down toward the tail feathers. The wing is little more than an elongated teardrop shape that has been dished out. Thinking of the model as a series of basic shapes rather than as a complex animal form makes the process a lot less intimidating and the end result more realistic. In the original, the eagle is holding an arrow. I decided to change that to a tree branch in my version. I'm not sure if the eagle is sitting on the branch, getting ready to take off, or if it's carrying the tree branch and getting ready to land. I suppose that decision will be left up to the person viewing it if mine is still around 100 years from now. After I had most of the shape roughed in, I switched from the cutter to a sanding disc. And here's where I really made some changes to the look of my eagle. Rather than carving individual scale-like feathers, as on the original, I used the edge of the sanding disc to create a layered texture on the surface. I think these marks more resemble feathers, and they're really easy to create. It's not that I didn't like the feathers on the original. In fact, I thought they were part of its charm, but I didn't necessarily want mine to be an exact copy anyway. After all, using a little bit of my own creativity was the whole point of the project. The sanding disc also smoothed out the rough surfaces created by the cutter, especially when I was working against the grain. And since this particular disc I was using was 80 grit, I could do a fair amount of shaping with it as well, with even more control than I had with that aggressive cutter. Because both the cutters and the sanding discs are 1.5 inch wide circles, I did find it easier to use some carving burrs to get into some of the tighter spots and on some of the more detailed work. These particular burrs are made from carbide, but a simple rotary tool and some high-speed steel burrs would have done the job too. One feature of the original that I did want to match as closely as I could was the unique shape of the eagle's beak. I'm not sure that it's a realistic form for an eagle. It looks more like a parrot's beak. But I think it's a big part of the carving's charm, and I didn't want to mess with that. The eye is the focal point of the whole carving, so I wanted that to really stand out. Unfortunately, there happened to be a knot in the wood right where the eye had to go, so that added an extra challenge to the carving process. I wasn't worried about sanding everything perfectly smooth because I knew that I was going to apply an acrylic paint and that would cover up many of those scratches. For the base coat, I used a yellow ochre to give the eagle a golden appearance. After that was completely dry, I put a dark brown on top. I had to put this top coat on in sections because I wanted to wipe some of it off with a sponge before it dried too much. This exposed the yellow undercoat on the high points, which really made the texture of the feather stand out. The same color combination is seen on the original, though I'm not sure if the brown was intentionally removed when it was wet, like I'm doing, or if the yellow was exposed over time through wear. I wanted to suggest wear on mine too, so I tried to wipe more of the brown from the areas that would be handled the most over time, like the edges around the beak and the tops of the wings and at the tree branch. I also use this technique to emphasize the bird's shape, leaving the lower points darker while lightening the high points like the shoulder and the wingtips. This made it look even more three-dimensional. I had to rinse the wet paint from my sponge frequently as I worked, and I even used some paper towel towards the end. I was really happy with the way the paint came out. I think it gives the carving a lot of life while still maintaining its old folk art appearance. Overall, I really had a lot of fun on this project, and it was much easier than I expected. I really think the hardest part was convincing myself that I could do it in the first place. Not everyone can do fine wood carving, but folk art isn't always about pure talent as much as it is about creativity and the willingness to try something new. Whether it be carving or sculpting or painting or anything else, the world is full of awesome work created by people that never considered themselves to be artists. So give it a try. You may just find yourself a new hobby. I'll put a link to the tools I use in the notes below the video if you'd like to learn more. And be sure to check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, which is full of even more ways to improve your shop skills and to make you a better woodworker. Subscriptions are free at stumpynubs.com. Happy power carving!